The law says that Dustin Duren is not guilty. The law says that Dustin was justified when he shot Caitlyn Naffziger. The law says a person has the right to use deadly force when they reasonably believe that someone is committing or about to commit a kidnapping. Caitlyn had kidnapped Dustin's child before. She had a plan to kidnap his children again. She told Dustin he would never see his children again, and she was holding Elowen hostage in front of him. Dustin reasonably believed that Caitlyn was committing or about to commit a kidnapping. Dustin Duren is not guilty. This is a case of secret plans, broken promises, and a father's unyielding love. It is about a Marine reacting to a threat toward his beloved daughter. A horrific tragedy, but not a criminal offense. The law says that Dustin Duren was justified when he shot Caitlyn Naffziger. Dustin Duren is not guilty. Caitlyn Naffziger went to Dustin's apartment in Berlin in late February 2024 under false pretenses. She told him that she was there to drop off his daughter Valen, but she was actually there with a secret plan that she came up with together with her Aunt Brenda, a secret plan to take both kids to Minnesota without Dustin knowing, a secret plan to kidnap the children. And it wasn't the first time that Caitlyn Naffziger had kidnapped one of their children. When the family lived in Las Vegas, Caitlyn walked out of the house with baby Valen in the stroller. She pretended she was going to the park. Hours later, she hadn't returned. Dustin went to the park to look for them, and they weren't there. Caitlyn had taken the baby not to the park, but to the airport. She was flying to Minnesota with their baby, moving out of the state with Dustin's child, without telling him, without getting his agreement, without even letting him say goodbye. Caitlyn had kidnapped Dustin's child before, and when she came to New Hampshire, she planned to do it again. Caitlyn and Brenda had a secret plan to kidnap the kids, to unlawfully interfere with Dustin's custodial rights, to take both Elowen and Valen to Minnesota without even telling Dustin. But that secret plan was interrupted. Caitlyn had to change her plan once Dustin began to figure out that something wasn't right. And here's what happened. First, Brenda drops Caitlyn off at the restaurant rather than sticking around to take Caitlyn back to her place in Hampton. Then, Caitlyn wants to go back to Dustin's apartment in Berlin, where she had told him before she didn't want to stay. The next day, Caitlyn won't tell him when she is planning to leave. Caitlyn is acting suspiciously. She's ignoring him, doing something on her phone, refusing to engage about what is happening with their children and what she is planning to do. And this is the exact same thing that she did last time she kidnapped one of their children. And so Dustin is getting more and more suspicious. After Caitlyn ignores him all afternoon, Dustin decides that Caitlyn, who's refusing to communicate with him, is no longer welcome in his apartment. He tells her she needs to leave. She ignores him again. He tells Caitlyn it's time to leave and he will drive her back to Brenda's place. And to get ready to go, he puts Valen in the car seat near the kitchen. And when Dustin tells Caitlyn that she's no longer welcome at his place, Caitlyn's secret plan to kidnap the children is interrupted. Caitlyn realizes she is not going to be able to steal the kids away from Dustin without him knowing. And so Caitlyn changes her plan. She reacts. She grabs Elwyn to use her as leverage, to use her as a pawn to try to enact the plan. Dustin comes back into the living room and sees Caitlyn sitting on the couch, holding Elwyn from behind. Elwyn is straddled on Caitlyn's knee. Dustin tells Caitlyn, "Come on, we're leaving," and tries to grab Elwyn to get Elwyn ready to go. But Caitlyn refuses to let Elwyn go. She grabs Elwyn and she pulls her back. And Dustin lets go because he doesn't want to engage in a physical struggle with Caitlyn over their child. So he again asks. He starts to beg Caitlyn to let go of Elwyn. Caitlyn refuses. She says no. And at this point, Dustin's internal radar is going off. Caitlyn is refusing to release their child. She's physically restraining her. She's putting her at risk. And Caitlyn has been acting suspiciously. She's been acting the same way that she did last time she kidnapped one of their children. Caitlyn is beginning to become a threat. Dustin is a Marine. He's trained to respond to threats, and he's responding at this point in the way he has been trained. He's at condition orange. He feels there is a danger to his child, and at condition orange, he's focused in solely on that threat and his need to protect his child. Dustin is begging and pleading with Caitlyn to just let Elwyn go. And Caitlyn again refuses. Caitlyn tells him that unless he pays her $2,000 a month, she is taking the children back to Minnesota and he will never see them again. Let's be clear, she is not asking for child support. She is not asking for money to help her take care of the children. She is asking for money so that he can have the children. She's asking him to pay her money so that he can keep the children. At this point, she's holding Dustin's child hostage, holding her for ransom, saying that she'll only release her if he gives her money. And she's also threatening to call the police and to lie to them, to tell them that Dustin took Elwyn to Berlin without permission, and that she's going to lie to the police unless he gives her money. And while she's threatening to take his children from him and make sure that he never sees them again, she's continuing to confine, to restrain their child. Dustin feels like this is a hostage situation. Elwyn isn't safe. He's panicking. He keeps begging and pleading, begging Caitlyn to just let Elwyn go. She refuses. She continues her threats that Dustin will never see the children again, that she is taking them from him. And she continues to confine Elwyn in her arms. At this point, the tension is rising. Valen is crying from her car seat in the other room, and Elwyn is crying, both from the argument and from being physically restrained by Caitlyn. The situation is overwhelming. Dustin is scared for Elwyn. He needs to make sure that she's safe. His fatherly instincts, his protective instincts, are telling him that something is seriously wrong. The woman who kidnapped his child before is telling him she's going to do it again, and this time he can see her physically holding their child hostage. Dustin, trying again to protect his daughter, tries to take Elwyn for the second time. And Caitlyn pulls her, yanks back again, and Dustin lets go. Caitlyn continues her threats to take the children and ensure that Dustin never sees them again. Caitlyn is escalating. She's getting more and more aggressive. She's kidnapped one of their children before. She's threatened to take them from him before, but this time is different. This time, she's holding his daughter hostage, holding her for ransom right in front of him. This time, she's confining his daughter, restraining his daughter, using physical force against his daughter. And Caitlyn had been on the phone. Dustin's thinking, is there someone outside, maybe Brenda, waiting? He's thinking, she's saying she's taking my kids from me. She must have a plan. And Dustin tries one more time to take Elwyn, to free her, to make sure she's safe. This time, he tries harder. He tries to grab one of Caitlyn's wrists with one hand and wrap his arm behind Elwyn with another so that he can free Elwyn from Caitlyn's restraint. But instead of letting go, Caitlyn gets more aggressive, more physical. Caitlyn braces her leg against the table. She yanks back even harder than she has before. She pulls, she twists, she bear hugs Elwyn. And Elwyn lets out a scream, a cry of pain from being yanked back by Caitlyn. Dustin and Elwyn lock eyes, and Dustin sees Elwyn's fear and her pain. And hearing Elwyn scream is horrific. It's a line that has been crossed. Elwyn is about to be kidnapped. Elwyn is in immediate danger. And so Dustin acts immediately. And he very, very quickly, with deliberate motion and without conscious thought, acts the way that he has been trained. The only thing in his mind is save Elwyn. His internal radar goes into condition red when a threat is so immediate, a danger so imminent that you need to take action. Like he had been trained, instinctually, automatically, he grabs his gun, chambers around, grabs the collar of Elwyn's shirt with one hand, and pulls her as far toward him as he can while Caitlyn is still restraining him. And while Elwyn is still in Caitlyn's arms, still being held hostage, he fires a single shot. And immediately after he shoots, Elwyn is released from Caitlyn's arms and she is freed. Elwyn wraps her arms around Dustin and he runs out of the house and puts her in the car. He talks to Elwyn and makes sure that she is physically unharmed. But he's still in this heightened mode, this need to protect his kids. He grabs what he thinks they would need, he puts Valen in the car, and he drives. And once he's on his way, once he knows both kids are safe, once he's out of condition red, he feels horrible. What has happened is tragic. Caitlyn is someone he cares about and who is important to him and his children. He knew that he had been acting to save Elwyn, but that doesn't mean he isn't devastated by what just happened. And he knows he needs to turn himself in, but he wants to spend some time with the girls first to make sure that they are unharmed, to make sure that they are okay, not just physically, but mentally. He calls his mom. He tells her he shot Caitlyn. He tells her to call the police. And then he turns his phone off so he can have some time with the girls. And he drives, checking in on the girls along the way. The following morning, he turns around and heads back to New Hampshire to turn himself in. And he is hoping to have a meal with the girls before he does so. But the police locate him first. He cooperates, he complies with their commands, he makes sure they know that there are children in the car and exactly where his gun is located. And he does these things to make sure his children are safe. And then he speaks with the police, voluntarily, although he's under no obligation to do so. He's still in shock when he tells them what has happened. He feels horrible about what has happened, and he doesn't want to blame Caitlyn. He doesn't know New Hampshire's law on justification, and he doesn't know the law of defense of others. All he knows is that he was acting to protect Elwyn. When the state played the video of his interview, the last thing we heard Dustin say was about Elowen. He says, not that it even justifies anything, but it's like, she's just my everything. And Dustin's right that Elowen is his everything, but he doesn't know the law. The law says that Dustin is justified. The law says that Dustin is not guilty. The judge will instruct you on the law. He will tell you, evidence has been presented that Dustin acted in defense of another with respect to each of the charges. He will tell you that you must find Dustin not guilty unless the state proves beyond a reasonable doubt that he did not act in defense of another. And the state cannot meet its burden. Dustin did act in defense of Elowen. He is not guilty. The judge will tell you that when looking at the evidence that Dustin acted in defense of Elowen, you should consider all the circumstances surrounding the incident. You should consider how he acted under the circumstances as they were presented to him at the time, and not necessarily as they appear upon detached reflection. The judge will tell you that Dustin had the right to use deadly force to defend Elowen if he reasonably believed that Caitlyn was committing or about to commit a kidnapping. Dustin's belief that Caitlyn was about to commit a kidnapping was reasonable. Dustin had the right to use deadly force. Dustin is not guilty. And consider all the evidence you've heard that Caitlyn was about to commit a kidnapping. And I'm going to highlight just 4 of the many things that you've heard. First, Caitlyn's own aunt told you that Caitlyn had a plan to take the children to another state without telling Dustin. Second, Caitlyn had kidnapped one of their children before. Caitlyn had taken one of their children, pretended she was going to the park, and actually gone to the airport to take Valen out of state, to move her to Minnesota without even letting Dustin know. Third, Caitlyn was holding Elowen hostage, telling Dustin he was never going to see either of their children again. And fourth, Caitlyn was willing to harm Elowen rather than let her go. Caitlyn was in fact attempting to commit a kidnapping. We heard it from her own family member. And therefore, Dustin's belief that she was about to commit a kidnapping is not only reasonable, it's correct. During jury selection, we talked about the fact that parents have a responsibility, a duty, to protect their children. And that's what Dustin was doing. He was protecting his child, ensuring she was not kidnapped. The facts are clear. Caitlyn was about to commit a kidnapping. You heard it from Brenda, and you heard it from Dustin. The law is clear. Because Dustin reasonably believed that Caitlyn was about to commit a kidnapping, Dustin had the right to use deadly force. Dustin is not guilty. The state gets to make its closing argument last, and Dustin won't have the opportunity to respond. So let's talk a little bit about what the state is likely going to say and about the evidence the state presented or didn't present during the trial. First, you should not automatically believe that what the state is telling you is correct. The state showed you that in its opening statement. The state's claims about what the evidence would be in its opening statement were wrong, and they were misleading. Here's one example of when they were wrong about the evidence. The state told you, even put up on its big fancy screen, that Dustin was asked, "Fair to say you know you are endangering Elowen," and that he said yes. But the sergeant, the police officer, the state's own witness, told you that what actually happened was the exact opposite. Dustin said, "Could it be that I'm endangering Elowen by what I did?" And I would very much say no. Dustin was asked, "Fair to say you know you weren't endangering Elowen," and that's what he said yes to. What the state told you about the evidence was wrong. What the state told you about the evidence was misleading. It told you that Dustin said the shooting was very deliberate, but it didn't tell you that that wasn't all he said. He said it was very, very fast, very deliberate. And that was misleading. That left out half the sentence to create a misimpression. The state also got it wrong when they said that Dustin grabbed Elowen, she was in his arms, he stepped back, and then he shot. That's what the state said happened in its opening statement, and that's not what happened. And the state knows that's not what happened. The state had proof in their evidence that what they are saying happened is not true. Their claim that he had Elowen in his arms and stepped back is not true. How do we know that? We know that because the range of fire was close enough that Caitlyn's hair got caught in the slide of the gun.
Objection. May counsel approach.
Members of the jury, I'm instructing you, I'm striking the last sentence from the closing argument and instructing you to disregard it, and I will return to my seat now. Okay, thank you.
This is state's Exhibit 24A. They didn't talk to you too much about State's Exhibit 24A. They talked to you about the gun, but not about the other half of the picture. The other half of the picture says hair removed from slide. So you will take it back with you, and you can see it right now. The police tampered with the evidence. They took the hair from
Objection.
the slide.
May counsel approach?
Yes. Excuse me, members of the jury, I'm striking the last sentence of the defendant's closing argument based upon the totality of the evidence that has been submitted. Also, there was no evidence adduced during trial of any improper action in the collection of forensic data. Attorney Kettles, you may proceed.
States 24A shows that hair was removed from the slide. The state didn't present any evidence that it tested the hair. The state didn't present any evidence about whose hair it was. The state didn't have its witnesses talk to you about the hair that was removed from the slide of the gun. And the state didn't talk about the fact that hair had been removed from the slide of the gun during its opening argument. And we can't know whose hair that was because the state didn't present any evidence, because the state didn't test it. But we can think about whose hair it must have been. We can think about where Dustin said his arm was when he fired, and where Caitlyn was in relation to that gun and the slide of that gun. We can think about the fact that Caitlyn's hair wouldn't have gotten caught in the slide of the gun if he had grabbed Elwyn, taken a step back, and then shot. Caitlyn was still holding, still restraining, still confining Elwyn when Dustin shot her. Dustin was justified. Dustin explained to you that Caitlyn was still bear hugging, still restraining Elwyn when he fired the gun. He explained to you that he pulled onto the collar of Elwyn's shirt with one hand to pull her forward to try to get her, but that she wasn't released from Caitlyn's arms. She wasn't safe until after he shot. The state may try to argue that that's not what he told the police, but you have the video. Watch it. They say that he stepped back. Nowhere in that interview does it say that he stepped back. Nowhere in that interview does he say that Caitlyn had let go before Elwyn was shot. I apologize, that Caitlyn had let go of Elwyn before he shot. I expect the state will make a big deal of the fact that the medical examiner told you that there was no evidence of close-range firing. But that just means that some of the markers that the medical examiner would look for weren't there. The medical examiner told you that he couldn't say exactly where the shot was fired. He said that it's possible, he said on cross-examination, that it's possible to fire from close range without those markers being there, especially when there is hair overlying the entry wound, like there was in this case. There wouldn't be gunshot residue on the skin if there was hair in the way, and there's been no evidence presented that the state tested Caitlyn's hair for gunshot residue. You have better evidence than the medical examiner, who can't say anything with 100% certainty, who wasn't there, who doesn't know whether or not this was justified. You have the photos from the apartment and from the autopsy. I'm not going to put them up again. But Caitlyn was sitting on the couch facing forward. She was shot in the side of the head. Dustin couldn't have had Elwyn in his arms, taken a step back, and then shot. If he had done that, she would have been shot in the forehead from the front. Instead, what happened, what the evidence shows, is that Dustin was grabbing Elwyn's collar with one arm and shooting with the other, while Caitlyn was still confining and restraining Elwyn. It's the only thing that makes sense with all of the physical evidence, that which was presented to you and that which was not, and which was not tested. It's the only thing that makes sense with the location of the gunshot entry wound and exit wound. It's the only thing that makes sense with the trajectory of the bullet down through the drawers. The state's got it wrong when it describes where Dustin was and where Elwyn was when the shot was fired. The evidence that the state presented about what Elwyn says happened also gets it wrong. It's also misleading. The only evidence the state presented about what Elwyn says happened comes from a doctor, not from a police officer or an investigator. Let's go over exactly what Dr. Robertson said. Dr. Robertson was leading Elwyn. She was asking her pointed questions, trying to figure out whether she had any medical issues, based on the only information the doctor had at the time, which was that Dustin shot Caitlyn. Dr. Robertson did the best exam she could with that limited information. Dr. Robertson said that she asked Elwyn if there was anything wrong with her, and at first, Elwyn said no. And only after Dr. Robertson guided her, led her to the answer, did Elwyn eventually say that her ear hurt and pointed to her left ear. Dr. Robertson had to ask her a very specific question to get that answer. She had to ask her how her ear got hurt. And Elwyn answered that question. She said, Mom and Dad were fighting, and Dad hurt Mom and me, and there was a lot of blood. And Elwyn's ear hurt because she had heard a gun that Dustin shot. That's not up for dispute. But think about what Dr. Robertson didn't know to ask. Dr. Robertson asked Elwyn if she was hurt anywhere else on her body, and Elwyn said yes. But Dr. Robertson didn't know what else had happened. She didn't know that Caitlyn had grabbed Elwyn, yanked her, pulled her, twisted her, made her scream in pain. And so the doctor couldn't get the right information out of Elwyn. The doctor didn't know what questions to ask to help Elwyn explain why else her body hurt. Elwyn was just 4 years old, and the doctor, who didn't know everything that had happened, couldn't ask her the right questions to get the full story from her. The state didn't have Elwyn testify. They didn't present testimony of any police officers or investigators who had spoken to Elwyn. They didn't give you the full picture of what Elwyn said. They gave you one small glimpse from a doctor who was there to treat Elwyn, not to interview or investigate. And the doctor didn't know what had happened and didn't know what to ask. You didn't hear the full story of what Elwyn said. The state also presented evidence in a misleading way when it cross-examined Dustin. It tried to suggest that Dustin never told the police that Caitlyn threatened to take the kids. But Dustin told the police over and over again that Caitlyn threatened to take the kids. You have Dustin's statements to police in evidence. And here's the rough timestamps for all the times, not all, but some of the times, when he tells the police that she threatened to take the kids away from him, both before the incident and during. 28 minutes and 13 seconds, he says, "She just kept threatening, well, okay, I'm going to take the kids away." 28:47, he said, every month it was basically the same thing of her wanting more money with threats of taking the kids away. 31:11, he said, she was basically threatening to put me in prison and take the kids away. 32:39, she threatened to arrest me and take the kids away. He starts discussing the day of the incident. 59:18, she started getting more and more aggressive about how, no, I'm going to take the kids from you. An hour and 16 seconds. The one thing that does set me off is these continued threats of taking the kids away from me. An hour, 1 minute, 58 seconds. Her just again threatening to take the kids and saying she just wasn't going to leave and that she wasn't going to leave and that she was going to take Elwyn and Valen back to Minnesota. By an hour and 32 minutes into this interview, he said it so many times that the police start talking about how she's threatening to take the kids away. Dustin told the police, and he told you, that she threatened to take the kids away over and over and over again because that's what happened. I've given a lot of timestamps, but I'd ask you to take a listen to the video around 1 hour and 40 minutes. That's when Sergeant McLaughlin asks, and I'm quoting, "The training you're talking about is marksmanship training, not specifically hostage? Because that's my first thought, was you're trying to remove Elwyn from a harmful situation. Do you have training in hostage-type scenarios?" That's the investigating officer's first thought, that Dustin was trying to remove Elwyn from a harmful situation and wondering if he had training in hostage-type scenarios. That was the police officer's first thought, because Dustin was trying to remove Elwyn from a harmful situation, from a hostage-type scenario. Think about the evidence that the state didn't present to you. The state didn't call Brenda. The state didn't talk to you about or present evidence of testing of the hair stuck in the slide. The state didn't ask the medical examiner about how hair impacts gunshot residue. The state didn't have a police officer who spoke to Elwyn testify. The state had Dustin's phone. They had his text messages with Caitlyn, his text messages with Lori, his text messages with Rob, but they didn't show them to you. They didn't want you to hear what they said. And those text messages prove that what Dustin told you is true.
Objection.
Members of the jury, based upon the state of the evidence, I am going to strike the last sentence of the defendant's closing argument and instruct you to disregard it. Thank you.
I expect the state is going to try to argue that Dustin didn't reasonably believe that Caitlyn was committing or about to commit a kidnapping because she was the children's mother and because there was no court order on custody. But that just doesn't make sense. Think about it. Imagine if Caitlyn's secret plan had gone into effect. Dustin would have woken up in the morning to both of his children gone, stolen, kidnapped, taken away to another state. We are talking about unlawfully taking children away from their father to another state permanently without him knowing. We are talking about coming up with a secret plan. We are talking about deception. We are talking about Caitlyn planning to commit a crime. Dustin reasonably believed that Caitlyn was about to commit a kidnapping. And the fact that she's the children's mother doesn't change that. The state's also got it wrong. They're missing the point when they spend hours and days focusing on cell site location data and testimony from someone who saw Dustin's car and presenting a whole lot of evidence of things that aren't in dispute, that Dustin told you happened. They're focusing on what happened after the shot was fired. But what matters in this case is what was happening immediately before and while the shot was fired. This whole case is about Dustin's defense of Elwyn, that Dustin was justified under the law. Dustin wanted to spend more time with his girls. That's not a crime. He's not charged with anything related to that. It's only human nature. It's a father wanting to make sure his kids are okay. He wasn't denying what had happened. He called his mom and told her. He knew his dad would call the police. He made sure they knew the girls were okay, and he told them that after he took some time with the girls, he was going to turn himself in. He didn't deny what had happened when he waived his right to remain silent and spoke voluntarily with the police. And he didn't deny what had happened when he took the stand here yesterday and spoke to you. Nothing that happened after the fact changes what happened in that apartment. It doesn't change that Dustin reasonably believed that Caitlyn was about to commit a kidnapping, that Caitlyn had a kidnapping plan, that Dustin was justified under the law. The state is wrong about whether Dustin's use of deadly force was justified. Think about Dustin's perspective. Think about what was going through Dustin's mind at the time. Dustin didn't think there was any help available. Dustin had spent months trying to figure out how to deal with Caitlyn. He called his parents. He called her parents. He called a lawyer in Minnesota and one in Vegas. He called the Berlin Police Department, and they told him they couldn't help. Think about that time a year or two ago when he called the police in Vegas and they didn't show up until after the threat was gone. Think about the fact that Caitlyn had kidnapped his child before and she had a plan to do it again. The judge will instruct you that you should consider how Dustin acted under the circumstances as they were presented to him at the time, and not necessarily as they appeared upon detached reflection. Consider how he felt at the time in that moment that Elwyn is screaming in pain. Consider his perspective as a Marine his perspective as a father whose child had been kidnapped before by the very same person who was holding his child hostage in front of him. And I'd imagine the state is going to talk a whole lot about other things that they think Dustin should have done instead. But think about what's going on here. Dustin tries to de-escalate the situation. He tries to talk to Caitlyn. She won't talk to him. He begs her and pleads with her to just let Elwyn go, and she refuses. He tries to just grab Elwyn, and Caitlyn won't let him. He begs again for Caitlyn to let Elwyn go, and she refuses. He tries to get Elwyn a second time, a third, and the third time he tries even harder, grabbing Caitlyn's wrist with one hand and trying to pull on Elwyn from behind. And it is only once Caitlyn physically harms Elwyn, only when Caitlyn is willing to go to the length of letting her child be harmed, be hurt, to enact her kidnapping plan, that Dustin acts. Even when Dustin grabbed the firearm, even when Caitlyn heard him chamber around, she still didn't let Elwyn go. Even when Dustin pointed the firearm at her, Caitlyn still didn't let go of Elwyn. Caitlyn was still holding Elwyn hostage even after he had taken those steps. Those steps of grabbing the firearm and chambering it weren't enough. So Dustin did what he had to do. Dustin reasonably believed the amount of force he used was necessary because nothing else worked. And again, you will be instructed to think about Dustin's actions under the circumstances as they were presented to him at the time, when he acted in the heat of passion. Consider the stress, the anxiety, the fear, and the need to take immediate action, to prevent Elwyn from being hurt, to make sure Elwyn was safe. Your role is not to Monday morning quarterback. It's to think about what Dustin was seeing and thinking and feeling in the midst of this horrific situation when he had to make a split-second decision and act instinctually. And from that perspective, Dustin did what he had to do to save his child. Dustin was justified. Think about the fear that Dustin felt, hearing Caitlyn tell him he was never going to see his children again, seeing Elwyn restrained, confined, held hostage in front of him. And think about the fact that he did not take that action until Elwyn had been harmed, until Elwyn screamed in pain and locked eyes with him, until the line had been crossed. He was a Marine and a father responding to a threat. He was a Marine and a father protecting his beloved daughter. This is a tragedy, but it's not a crime. When you hear from the state, I ask you to keep in mind everything we've just talked about. I ask you to keep in mind that Caitlyn's own aunt told you that Caitlyn had a plan to kidnap the kids. Keep in mind that if Caitlyn had a plan to kidnap the kids, it was reasonable for Dustin to believe that she had a plan, that she was about to kidnap the kids. Keep in mind that the law says that Dustin had the right to use deadly force if he reasonably believed that Caitlyn was committing or about to commit a kidnapping. The judge will instruct you that you must apply the law and that you must hold the state to its burden. When you do, you will return the only fair and just verdict, the only one supported by both the evidence and the law, one declaring Dustin Duren not guilty.